My name is Chelsea, and I just graduated from State Community College last month. And although this event should have been a cause for joy for me, I didn't feel at all what others probably expected, because instead of being proud of myself and feeling free, I finally found it after a long time. After years of study and constant work, I felt a dull irritation, an anxious premonition that my life was still in someone else's hands, and I continued to be controlled, as if I were a child unable to make my own decisions and manage my own destiny. And before we continue, write in the comments from which city you are watching this video. Enjoy. I graduated from college on a full scholarship, which was undoubtedly a huge help for me. Because from the very first day I received the letter of enrollment, my parents made it clear to me that they did not intend to help me financially, and although I was quite happy with it, because I did not want to be for them. At times, I was still offended by the ease with which they relieved themselves of any responsibility for my future, as if I were not their daughter at all, but an outsider who happened to be in their house and had to solve all their problems on their own. To provide myself with at least some stability, I got a job at a small but cozy coffee shop located near the campus and worked there for all 4 years of my studies, learning not only how to brew the best cappuccino in the area, but also to tolerate the whims of irritated visitors, get up early, work in any weather, and feel like an adult, a person who is responsible for himself, for his life, and for his decisions. Thanks to constant saving and unwillingness to indulge in excess, I managed to save enough money to buy a decent laptop, which became an indispensable assistant for me in my studies, as well as a new phone when my old one finally refused to work. And it would seem that I should have been proud that I was coping on my own, but all my confidence I was falling apart in those moments when I saw my parents repeatedly helping my older sister Janet, who had been married to her husband Greg for 5 years and was raising 2 children, 4-year-old Tommy and 2-year-old Sarah, and every time she showed up at our house with the children, my mother, without hesitation, put several large bills in her hand, which she could safely live on for a couple of weeks, and my father immediately took out brand new children's clothes from the closet, which he probably bought in advance, knowing that his beloved daughter would come again complaining about the lack of money. When this happened for the 3rd time in a month, I couldn't stand it, and staying with my mother in the kitchen, I carefully asked why they didn't hesitate to help Janet, but they never even offered me a cent, although I, unlike her, had managed all my life on my own without asking them for anything. The moment I said these words, my mother's face seemed to turn to stone, and her lips tightened into a thin line, and stirring the sugar in the tea with a spoon, she coldly said, "Janet has children to take care of, and you only have you. End of discussion." I could have continued the conversation, argued that it wasn't the money at all, but the injustice of their treatment of me. But knowing my mother, I understood that there was no point in this, because she had already made a decision for herself, and no words could change it, so I just kept silent, suppressing a dull resentment inside me, which I seemed to have already come to terms with, but which repeatedly surfaced in my soul, reminding me that for my parents, I had always been only a minor character in their family history. When graduation finally came, my parents, to my surprise, decided to have a party at our house, and although it would seem that I should have been happy, I realized that for them, it was just a way to show others what wonderful and caring parents they were, and not at all a desire to really share this with me. An important day. "We'll figure it out," Mom said when I tried to find out who would pay for the food and decorations, and I naively decided that maybe for the first time in a long time, they would actually do something for me. But later, it turned out that sorting it out meant spending $500. The dollars I saved for 2 months to pay for the party, and then invite all possible relatives and friends from the church, who spent the whole evening complimenting each other, admiring how my parents had done a wonderful job raising their 2 daughters. "You've done such an amazing job with both of your girls," Aunt Marge said enthusiastically, clinking a glass of lemonade with her mother. "It's just incredible," my father's friend from work added, nodding approvingly. I stood next to them, smiling tightly, but inside I was boiling with anger, because no one, Absolutely no one even guessed that all their words were lies, that my parents had never helped me, that I had achieved everything on my own, without their support and participation. But I didn't say anything. I just clenched my teeth and continued to play the grateful daughter, knowing that if I opened my mouth now, I would say something I would regret later. Towards the end of the evening, as the guests gradually began to disperse, my Uncle Pete, a good-natured but not overly tactful man, cornered me by the punch bowl and, after filling his glass, turned to me with a friendly smile. "So, Chelsea, what now? What are your plans for the future?" "What is it?" he asked, clearly expecting to hear something grand. I took a deep breath to contain my irritation and answered as calmly as possible. "I plan to get a job and rent my own place." But before I could continue, Mom, as if sensing that I was about to say something inappropriate, suddenly came up to me, put her hands on my shoulders, and said in that soft, sweet voice she used when she wanted to impress people, "Oh, Chelsea, there's no need to rush the rent. You can stay with us for now and save on housing." I looked at her in amazement, realizing that I was hearing about this for the first time. But judging by the approving nods from Uncle Pete and other relatives, for everyone else her words sounded like a natural and obvious gesture of care from a loving mother. "That's so generous of you, Linda," Uncle Pete admired, turning to Mom. "Rent is off the charts these days. It's so hard for young people to get started." The next morning at breakfast, when I was still sleepily moving my spoon over my bowl of oatmeal, thinking that now I would have to start a full-fledged job search and possibly immerse myself in endless interviews, Mom and Dad unexpectedly returned to the conversation they had started the night before, as if my indecision had no meaning for them. It was as if they had already decided everything for me and were now just communicating their will, leaving me no room to maneuver. "We've been talking a little bit about what we talked about yesterday," my father said, without looking up from his plate, in which he was carefully cutting toast, thickly buttered, as if his future mood depended on the accuracy of the cut. "And we've come to the conclusion that you shouldn't rush to move. You can stay. Here, while you're looking for a job, there's no point in spending money on rent if you don't have a stable income yet." Mom immediately nodded as if she completely shared his opinion, and before I could get a word in, she added softly, "Yes, dear, we just want to make it easier for you, because you are just starting your journey. Why immediately incur unaffordable expenses?" I blinked, considering their offer, but before answering, I automatically took a sip of coffee, which immediately burned my tongue, which was quite symbolic, because an unpleasant feeling was already burning inside me, as if their unexpected hospitality was hiding some kind of trick. Thanks," I managed, choosing my words carefully. "I'll think about it." And I really thought about it while I was looking for a job, because no matter how much I wanted to gain independence and separate from my parents as soon as possible, cold calculation said that their offer made sense, because I would have to pay much more for renting my own apartment than just putting up with their company. I sent out dozens of resumes, checked my email day after day hoping for a response, and to my relief, I quickly received a job offer at a merchant trading company, albeit in the very initial position, where my duties were mainly data entry and answering phone calls. But even that seemed to me. It was a good start because at least now I could count on a steady income, even if not too much. However, the first problem arose when I started looking for housing options, because with my starting salary of $2,800 per month, I couldn't afford an apartment that would meet my expectations, and everything in my price range was so far away in the suburbs that it would take a long time to get to work, for 2 or 3 hours each way, which seemed to me to be sheer madness. Meanwhile, my parents' house was only a 15-minute walk from my new office, and the more I considered the pros and cons, the more I realized that from a purely financial point of view, it would be wisest to stay with them until I had saved enough for a really good place to live, and therefore, although with great reluctance, I did tell my parents that I would stay with them for a while longer. "That's wonderful, dear," Mom beamed and even hugged me, and for the first time in a long time, this gesture seemed sincere to me, which even surprised me a little, but, as it turned out later, prematurely. At first, everything was really going well. About 2 weeks after I started my new job, my parents suddenly changed their behavior, starting to behave as if we hadn't had all those disagreements that had accumulated over the years, as if they were genuinely happy to have me around. Mom suddenly began to cook my favorite dishes that hadn't appeared on our table since I graduated from high school, and my father began to wonder how my day went and even jokingly said several times that he was proud of me. I even started to think that maybe they really realized their mistake and are now trying to fix our relationship, that maybe I was too hard on them. But then I got my first paycheck and everything changed. "We need to talk," my father said that night at dinner, putting his fork on the edge of a plate of meatloaf, and my mother immediately nodded in agreement, as if all this had been discussed in advance. "We're glad you're staying here," she began, putting on that caring smile she used when trying to soften the unpleasant news. "But now you're a working adult, and that means we expect you to contribute $400 a month for rent and another $200 for food," my father continued, not even bothering to look at my face, which was probably expressing complete shock at that moment. I almost choked on my meatloaf because $600 a month was more than a fifth of my net salary, and although I understood that they had the right to demand rent, their amount seemed excessive to me, and swallowing, I cautiously objected, That seems a little cool. That's a lot less than you'd pay for your own apartment," Mom said, giving me a reproachful look. "And that includes utilities." I couldn't argue with that, but I still felt cheated, because if they had said right away that they were going to charge me money, maybe I would have thought of other options. But now that I was settled into a certain rhythm, it was useless to argue, so I nodded, and gritting her teeth, she agreed. That's how my new life began. From Monday to Friday, I worked in the office, regularly paid my parents their $600 on the first of every month, tried to save at least something so that sooner or later I could move out. But my savings grew slower than I had hoped, and although my life was far from ideal, at least I felt some stability. Until one ordinary autumn evening, I returned home and found the living room full of suitcases. Janet was sitting on the couch with her arms crossed over her chest, looking annoyed. Greg was nervously pacing back and forth. Little Tommy was running in circles around the coffee table, and Sarah was crying in my mother's arms, who was trying to calm her down by swaying from side to side. "What's going on here?" I asked, putting my bag on the floor and feeling an unpleasant knot in my stomach. Janet gave me a hard look and, without even trying to soften the news, simply stated, "Greg was demoted. We can't afford an apartment anymore, so we're moving here until everything gets better." I forced myself to smile, but inside I already knew it wasn't going to end well for me. Within a few days, my life turned into an endless, exhausting nightmare that seemed to have no intention of ending, because from the very moment Janet and her family crossed the threshold of our house, it finally ceased to be my home, turning into a crowded, noisy place where I was assigned the role of a free babysitter, assistant, of the service staff, by anyone, but not by an adult who has the right to personal space and peace. Janet, of course, didn't work because, as she put it, children need a mother, not strangers. And it was for this reason that she stayed at home, ostensibly fully devoting herself to taking care of Tommy and Sarah. But in reality, this only meant that she was on the phone, occasionally idly watching the children scurry around the living room, while my mother, not hiding her delight, repeated, "What a wonderful mother you are, dear, just like I was at your age," completely oblivious or unwilling to notice that the main burden fell on me. As soon as I entered the house after a long, tiring day at the office, Janet immediately grabbed her purse and, halfway to the door, threw over her shoulder, "Oh, good, you're home." Tommy needed help with coloring, and Sarah had just woken up, and before I could open my mouth, she was gone, dragging Greg with her, sometimes to meet friends, sometimes to go shopping, sometimes just to get some air, and sometimes they didn't come back at all until the children were asleep, leaving I have to deal with their whims, dinner, bathing, and endless bedtime stories. The first few times I didn't mind because despite the difficult relationship with my sister, I really loved Tommy and Sarah. They were the only ones in this house who treated me with sincere affection, and when Tommy happily showed me his doodles and Sarah fell asleep in my arms, it seemed to me that maybe I can handle it. But after 2 weeks, when my every evening turned into the same exhausting performance and my free time disappeared without a trace, I realized that I was just being used. I would come home, and instead of resting, I would have endless babysitting work, after which I had neither the strength nor the desire to do my own thing. Washing was postponed until midnight. Cooking the next day seemed like a feat, and just calmly taking a shower, not hurrying, not thinking about what. At any moment, someone will knock on the door asking me to hold Sarah while Mom talks to Janet. I didn't even dream about it anymore. One evening at dinner, when I was once again picking at my food with a fork, not even having the strength to pretend to be satisfied, I finally spoke, trying to remain calm, but feeling everything boil inside me. "I can't keep watching the kids every night," I said in a flat but firm voice, rearranging the food on my plate as if I were trying to organize not only dinner, but also my life, which was gradually turning into chaos. I get very tired after work. There was a dull, drawn, out pause at the table, and suddenly Janet grinned briefly, dryly, with a hint of obvious disdain. "Are you serious now?" she snapped, looking at me as if I'd just said something not just ridiculous, but downright outrageous. "Do you think you're tired? Try to be a mom." I opened my mouth, but before I could object, my father, without even looking up from his plate, lazily said, "The family helps the family. That's what we do." I looked around the table, hoping to see at least a shadow of understanding on someone's face, but instead I saw only Mom's approving nod, as if everything that was happening was the natural order of things, and my dissatisfaction and fatigue didn't matter at all. "Then why don't you guys watch the kids sometimes?" I asked quietly, hardly hoping for an answer that would suit me. Mom shook her head with an expression of deep weariness and suffering, as if I had just suggested that she climb Mount Everest. "We're too old to be chasing babies all evening," she said with firm confidence in her voice. The next month passed without any changes. I continued to work, continued to look after Tommy and Sarah, continued to pay the rent, watching as my once proudly growing savings account froze at one point and refused to grow further because I simply did not have enough money to save anything beyond the mandatory payments. But then, 2 months after Janet and Greg moved into our house, my parents gave me another surprise. "We need to discuss something important," my father began in his usual serious voice at dinner, and when I heard this tone, I already knew that the conversation would not bring me anything good. "Our expenses have increased with the increase in the number of people in the house," Mom picked up, pretending that she was incredibly uncomfortable saying these words. "But what can we do? Circumstances compel. That's why we're asking you to contribute an additional $200 per month." I froze with a fork in my hand, feeling my insides sinking. "800?" I repeated, almost in disbelief. "This is almost a third of my salary. It's still cheaper than renting your own place," my father pointed out calmly, taking a sip of water as if we were discussing not my financial situation, but the weather forecast for tomorrow. I looked around the table, stopping at Janet and Greg. "How much do Janet and Greg pay?" I asked, already knowing the answer, but still hoping it would be different. Silence. Mom and Janet exchanged a quick glance before Mom steeled herself and said in that icy voice that left no room for argument, "Your sister can't afford to pay the rent." "That's right," her father agreed. "She has a family to support, and you're single and have no obligations, so you need to help more." Something inside me snapped, but I held on. "I see," I managed. That night, lying in my room, for the first time, I seriously started looking for apartments near work, and although even the cheapest decent studio apartment cost $500 per month, plus utilities, which meant that I would have to live extremely economically, I realized that I needed to get out of here at all costs. But the problem was that I needed the initial amount, because I needed at least $4,000 to move, including down payments and a security deposit, and I just didn't have it, so I decided to lay low and start saving. No takeaway coffee, no extra expenses, no new things. Every cent went to my escape fund. But as it turned out, the universe, or more precisely, my family, had completely different plans for me. I immediately sensed something was amiss, not just because the suitcases at the front door and the fussy movements of the whole family did not bode well, but because it was all happening too quietly, as if they were trying their best to make everything inconspicuous while I was sleeping, hoping to sneak out before I could ask a question. Questions that were obviously not part of their plans. When my mom saw me, she froze for a moment, as if she hadn't expected me to wake up and find them, then quickly put on her usual too sweet smile, which lately had only made me tense. "Oh dear, good morning." She said it too cheerfully, too casually, which immediately made my shoulders tense. "What's going on here?" I looked around at the suitcases, the children's toys, the neatly stacked boxes of clothes, Greg, who was hurriedly loading something into the trunk, and Janet, who was standing off to the side with an expression of annoyance on her face, as if the whole situation was tiring her, even though I still didn't even understand what exactly was going on. My father, who had been silent talking to Greg, suddenly turned to me, put a kind of sympathetic mask on his face, and sighing heavily said, "My mom and I decided that my sister, her family, and I needed a little change of scenery." "A change of scenery?" I asked, feeling an icy lump swirl inside me, a premonition of something much worse than I could have imagined. "Well, yes," Mom interjected, putting on that fake smile again, which in recent months seemed almost like a mockery to me. "We thought it would be great to spend the winter in Florida. You know, it's warm there, and Florida." I almost choked on my breath because everything that was happening was starting to make sense too quickly. For the whole winter? Mom exchanged glances with Dad again, then shrugged, as if it was nothing more than a whim, a random decision that didn't matter at all. "Well," she drawled, sighing, "most likely, yes." I blinked, feeling the blood rush to my face, because with each new word, they didn't just seem to betray me, but did it so easily, as if everything I'd done for them in recent months was self-evident. "And who paid for this little vacation?" I asked, already knowing the answer, but still hoping that at least they hadn't done that. Silence. Then Janet, who had only been watching the scene, crossed her arms over her chest and abruptly said, "What's the difference?" I turned to her, feeling my fingers clench into fists. "The difference is that it's my money. The difference is that I gave you $3,000 to fix the roof, and you didn't even call a contractor." Mom rolled her eyes as if I were a great egotist and not a person who had just been brazenly deceived, and sighing heavily said, "Chelsea, dear, well, you understand." "No, I don't understand." I took a step forward, feeling my voice break, and at that moment my father finally spoke up. "We can't live in a house with a leaky roof in winter, dear," he said in a tone as if I were talking nonsense. "We just decided that the best option would be to go to Florida and wait out the cold there." "What about me?" I gritted my teeth, feeling my insides churn with anger. "What about my money? What about my life? Did you just decide to leave and leave me here?" "But you're in no hurry," Mom exclaimed with the air of a person who has to explain the obvious. "You're comfortable here. You've always said that you don't want to spend money on rent." "Yes, because you charged me $800 a month for a room in your own house," I said, feeling my voice tremble, but not from self-pity, but from rage. "And now you just walk away, leaving me alone in this damn house?" "You're an adult, Chelsea," her father said softly, and that was the last blow. I stood there trying to digest what was said, while they continued to pack, hurriedly loading things into the car, while I looked at them with mute disbelief, realizing that for the past few months I hadn't lived with a family, but had simply been a resource that could be squeezed out until it ran out, and when it ran out, leave it behind quietly. I thought about the $700 washing machine, the new $200 sofa, the dishwasher, and every penny they'd pulled out of me, promising it would be the last time, and all I felt was furious, icy, bitter anger. And then, clenching my fists so that my nails dug into my palms, I made the final decision. I'm not just leaving here. I will make sure that they will never be able to use me again. As I stood in the middle of the kitchen, stunned, looking at my parents, who, without hiding their enthusiasm, discussed their upcoming vacation in Florida, I felt a slow but inexorable rage flare up inside me, which seemed to fill every cell of my body, leaving no room for disappointment, resentment, or even surprise. because if I had stopped for a moment and honestly admitted to myself, I would have realized that this was to be expected, that it was only a matter of time before they would take advantage of my kindness and naive belief that they would change someday. "Oh, good morning, sweetheart," my father said cheerfully, noticing me as if everything that was happening was the most ordinary thing, and not a brazen betrayal that he did not even try to hide. "We're going on a little trip. A trip to Florida, can you imagine? Our friends have a guest house there, and we're staying for 2 weeks to relax before Christmas." I blinked, feeling the rage inside squeeze my chest, not allowing me to breathe, and before I could stop myself, my voice came out faster than I could contain it. "Where did you get the money for a vacation in Florida?" At least Mom was decent enough to look guilty, but even that couldn't soften the blow I already felt inside, because I knew the answer. I knew it wasn't all paid for with their money, and yet I was hoping to hear something else. We used the money for the roof," she muttered, turning away, as if hoping it would be easier that way. "But don't worry, we'll save up for repairs again after the holidays." For a moment, everything went dark before my eyes, and I took a deep breath, trying not to scream. But this did not subside the anger, but only boiled even more. "You mean my money?" I said slowly, almost threateningly, looking straight at her, and she looked away again, which meant only one thing. I was right. "The $3,000 I gave you for emergency repairs has now gone on your vacation?" "Well, of course," my father intervened in his warning tone, the one that always meant, "Don't make a scene, be a good girl, accept everything as it is. Don't be dramatic, Chelsea." But I didn't care. "I gave you this money because you said it was urgent." I pointed sharply at Janet and Greg, who were trying to pretend they weren't listening to our conversation, even though I could see Janet rolling her eyes. "I've been giving you money for months while they've been living here for free, but apparently it wasn't enough, was it?" Mom abruptly straightened up and an icy coldness flashed in her eyes, which I knew all too well. "If you don't have enough money," she said slowly, "then you need to work harder." "Yes," Janet suddenly interjected, crossing her arms over her chest and looking down at me with a smug grin. "That's what adults do when they need more money." And then they left, leaving me alone in a big, cold, empty house with a leaky roof and a broken heart. After they left, I sat at the kitchen table for what seemed like hours, just staring into the void and listening to the silence that suddenly filled the house, replacing the endless children's screams, parents' reproaches, Janet's complaints demanding attention and care. And in that silence, it became clear to me that it would never stop, that they would keep taking and taking until there was nothing left of me. No money, no energy, no self-respect. I pulled my phone out of my pocket and slowly scrolled through my contacts until I found the name I needed. Lisa. She mentioned a few weeks ago that her sister is looking for a roommate. I clicked on her number. "Hi, Lisa," I said when she answered, and my voice sounded strangely firm. "Is your sister still looking for someone to share her apartment? Can I get her phone number?" Lisa's sister, Megan, lived just 2 blocks from my office. The perfect location, reasonable rent. I dialed it right away. "Lisa told me all about you," she said after I introduced myself. "She said you're super reliable and clean. I'd love to have you as a roommate." I felt the world slowly starting to recover. The next morning, I called the moving company and ordered them for the same day. Then I went through the house, making a list of everything that was bought with my money. Washing machine, furniture in the living room, coffee maker, microwave, dishwasher. I paid for all this. I'll take it all. When the transportation company answered, I calmly said, "Hello, I need to move furniture and household appliances." "When?" "Today." "Is it urgent?" "Yes." They arrived 2 hours later. By evening, everything I bought was installed in Megan's apartment. She was thrilled. "It's amazing," she said, running her hand over the new sofa. "My place was so empty before." I felt my lips twitch into a real smile for the first time in months. "I'm glad it worked out," I said, putting my clothes in my new closet. That night, I slept better than I had in the last few months, or maybe even years, because for the first time in a long time, I woke up without feeling anxious, without waiting for someone to knock on the door with another request or demand, without having to hold my teeth with a cry of annoyance because someone had imposed duties on me again, which I didn't choose. My new room was small but clean, with neat light-colored walls and a window overlooking a small courtyard in which someone had carefully planted several rose bushes covered with frost. And something about this view made me feel strangely calm, as if now I could finally control my life, decide what I want and what I will never tolerate again. But most importantly, this room was mine. For the next 2 days, I went to work, returned home to my new apartment, and enjoyed this feeling. A sense of freedom that I hadn't known for so long that I'd almost forgotten what it was like. I didn't tell my parents that I had moved out, not because I was afraid of their reaction, but simply because I didn't see the point in it. But then, 2 days before Christmas, my phone vibrated with an incoming message, and as soon as I saw the sender's name, I already knew that there would be something in their style inside. Mother, we'll be home tomorrow afternoon. Please cook dinner. Nothing special, just something warm. I laughed out loud because despite everything, they still thought that I was their personal chef, maid, and ATM machine, which they could use at any time, and that after all that had happened, I would really be waiting for them with open arms and a table set. The next day, I left work early and returned to my parents' house for the last time. I wasn't going to cook. I wasn't going to spend a penny more. So I just ordered food from a cheap Italian restaurant nearby. Pasta, salad, garlic bread, and put it all on the empty dining table, which was now the only piece of furniture in the living room. I even set out the plates and cutlery so as not to offend their feelings at all. And then, without saying a word, I left the house, closing the door with a key that I will never use again. The next morning, on Christmas Eve, I woke up to a barrage of missed calls and messages, and knowing who they were from, I didn't even bother to pick up the phone right away, just lay in bed, enjoying the peace and quiet that no one else could take away from me. When I finally looked at the screen, predictable but still funny chaos unfolded in front of me. Dad, where's all the furniture? Call me back now. Mom, what have you done? Call me back immediately. Janet, you're so selfish. Mom is crying because of you. I sighed, turned off the screen, went to the kitchen, and calmly made myself a cup of coffee in my new coffee maker, glad that no one was taking this morning away from me. No one was demanding that I get out of bed earlier than I want. No one was telling me how I should feel. At 10 in the morning, when I had a quiet breakfast and took a shower, I finally decided that it was fair to respond to all these tantrums, but not because I felt guilty. I wanted them to understand that I couldn't take anything away from me anymore. I called my mom. She answered on the first ring, and her voice rose to a screech. Chelsea, what's going on? You can't just take things from our house. I didn't take anything that didn't belong to me, I said calmly, feeling suddenly at ease, because for the first time in a long time, I had every right to my words. I paid for all this. Check the credit card statements if you don't believe me. There was a pause, and I could almost imagine her frantically sorting through the options to somehow turn the situation in her favor. But where are you? What is it? She finally asked. I've moved, I replied simply. I found a place closer to work. It was quiet for a moment, and then her voice changed, becoming softer, pleading, as if none of what had happened had ever happened. Honey, go home, let's talk. It's Christmas tomorrow. We are a family. We should be together. The family doesn't exploit each other, I said calmly, not allowing myself to hesitate. We made a mistake, Mom muttered, apparently realizing that the pressure wasn't working. We will refund your money. Just come home for Christmas. And I almost flinched. Almost. But then, in the distance, against the background, I heard Janet's voice, which obviously wasn't even trying to hide. Tell her that we need money to repair the roof now, and that's how my resolve became stronger again. I took a deep breath before saying, I'm not coming back. Chelsea, don't be silly. Never. But the roof. The roof is not my problem. I finished paying for this house. You own it. Figure it out for yourself. You're ungrateful. Goodbye, Mom. Merry Christmas. And before she could say anything else, I hung up, blocked their numbers. All of them. Mom, Dad, Janet, even Greg, because I didn't care what he thought. Then I turned off my phone completely and went for a walk in my new neighborhood, feeling light in every step for the first time. The next day was Christmas. Megan had gone to her parents for the holidays, so I had the apartment to myself. I made a good breakfast, watched Christmas movies, ordered Chinese food for dinner, and sat by the window, watching the snow fall slowly through the glass. People might think it's sad to spend Christmas alone, but it wasn't the first time. And for the first time in a long time, I felt calm. No one used me. No one made me feel guilty. No one emptied my bank account or my energy. It's been 6 months since I last set foot in my parents' house, 6 months of silence, 6 months in which I've never woken up to other people's demands, never heard a single reproach, and never felt like someone was trying to use me again. 6 months of peace, saving money, and building a life that finally belonged to me. Life with Megan turned out to be better than I could have imagined. We respected each other's boundaries, shared responsibilities fairly, never imposed communication, and if one of us wanted to spend the evening alone, it didn't cause feelings of guilt. Sometimes, on weekends, we would cook dinner together, try new recipes, discuss movies or TV series, but if one of us wasn't in the mood, the other would never take offense. And that was the best thing about our life together. I felt like I could breathe. But the past still found a way to remind her of herself. A month ago, my cousin Rachel called me, and when I heard her hesitant voice, I already knew that the conversation would be about my family. "I thought you might like to know," she said, hesitating a little. "Your parents. They had to take out a loan to repair the roof." I wasn't surprised. "How do you know that?" "Your mom told my mom that they're in a difficult situation right now because you dumped them," Rachel replied, and I could almost hear her rolling her eyes. The phone was quiet for a few seconds, and then she added, "I told my mom what really happened. I hope this is normal?" I felt a slight smile appear on my lips. "This is more than normal. Thank you, Rachel." She also mentioned that Janet and her family still live with their parents, but something has changed. Mom and Dad started charging them rent, and not just to ask, but to insist, she said. Now Janet and Greg have to contribute to the bills and help around the house. I almost laughed. They've done things for them that they've never done for me. 2 months ago, I got the opportunity to lead a small project team in the office, and despite the nervous tension, I did well. Yesterday, my boss called me into her office. "Chelsea, I'm impressed with your work," she said, looking at me with a professional warmth I've rarely seen in the eyes of executives. "We are creating a new position of assistant manager in the department, and I want you to apply." I tried to contain my excitement, but inside I was elated. "That would be great," I said, trying to sound calm. "The salary will be $48,000 per year," she continued, an increase of $11,000. With that kind of money, I could afford my own place sooner than I had planned. That evening, I started looking through ads for apartments for sale. Nothing special, just a small studio apartment within walking distance from work, and found several options in my price range, with availability in June or July. The perfect time if I get a promotion. I also studied interior design, put together a digital mood board with color schemes, furniture styles, and ideas for organizing the space, imagining how to make this home truly my own. Light blue and gray shades with yellow accents, minimalist furniture, lots of plants, a calm, peaceful space. Last weekend, I went to Target for a few small items, and when I was on my way to the checkout, I noticed them. Mom, Dad, Janet. They were pushing a cart through HomeGoods, looking at some things, and I stopped for a second, instinctively hiding behind the nearest storefront, but not before Janet noticed me. Our eyes met. She froze, then quickly pushed Mom and pointed in my direction. Mom looked at it, and she deliberately turned around, pushing the cart in the other direction. Her father followed her without even looking back. I felt a twinge of pain, but then I remembered. I remembered every month of operation. I remembered all the money they took away from me, and the pain was gone. They made their choice, and I made mine. 2 weeks ago, I saw them again at the grocery store. This time, it was just Mom and Janet. They were arguing about something in the cereal aisle. I stopped for a moment, watching them from afar, but now it felt different. I wasn't angry anymore. I didn't feel guilty anymore. They weren't my problem, and they never will be again. I walked past them with my basket without even slowing down, and none of them recognized me. I didn't approach them either. What was the point? Once I could have stopped. I could have waited for my mother to speak first, for my father to soften, for Janet to at least pretend to regret the past. But now that I looked at them briefly, at their tense faces, at the irritation in Janet's eyes, at the fatigue in my mother's expression, I suddenly realized that nothing has changed, and most likely it will never change. A few days later, Aunt Marge called me, my father's sister, and perhaps the only person in our family who has always been more reasonable than everyone else. "Your parents are having trouble paying off the loan," she said without preamble, as if she knew I wouldn't be surprised. "They asked the family for help." I sighed and couldn't help but smile bitterly. "I hope no one will give them money." "Most of us already know better," my aunt replied, a hint of regret in her voice. "Your cousin told us what they did to you." I wasn't surprised. "That's what I thought," I said, leaning on the arm of the chair and looking out the window. "They're looking for their next victim. Janet and Greg are still living with your parents," she continued, as if she wanted me to know the whole picture. "But your parents started charging them rent about 3 months ago." I laughed, not out of amusement, but out of the irony of the situation. "Is Janet furious about this?" "That's right," replied my aunt. "She says that they promised her that she would be able to live there for free." "That sounds familiar," I said dryly, realizing what it was like when promises turned into empty words. "They're fighting all the time now," my aunt added, and there was something like sympathy in her voice. "Your mom called me last week and was crying because Janet called her a selfish old witch." I couldn't help but laugh. "What an irony, isn't it?" "Will you ever talk to them again?" my aunt asked cautiously after a short pause. I sighed. "Not anytime soon. Maybe someday if they sincerely apologize and change their habits." I paused and then added, "But I'm not holding my breath waiting for this day." "I don't blame you," she said, and I felt something warm, something real in her voice, which reminded me that not all the family believed my parents' version of events. "As important as it is, I think you did the right thing." Her support meant a lot to me. Megan and I were having dinner last night, chatting about work and discussing weekend plans, when she suddenly asked, "Have you found any apartments?" I shrugged my shoulders, smiling to myself, because for the last few weeks I've really been looking at options, but I haven't done anything until I make a definite decision about the job. "I liked a few," I admitted. "I'm waiting for the promotion news before I do anything." She nodded, twirling her fork in her hands, and then said, "I'm going to miss you as a roommate." I looked at her and smiled sincerely. "But I understand why you want to have your own place," she added. "Thank you for understanding," I said, and suddenly I felt like saying something more. "And for being such a great roommate for the past 6 months. You really helped me when I needed it." She shrugged, but her eyes warmed. "That's what friends do," she said simply. And she's right. Real friends, a real family. They help each other without keeping score, without exploiting vulnerabilities, without demanding more in return than you can give. I received an email from the HR department this morning. They asked me to come for an interview for the position of assistant manager next Tuesday. I spent the whole day preparing answers to possible questions, choosing an outfit, checking if all the documents were in order. When I was hanging my jacket back in the closet, I accidentally made eye contact with my reflection, and suddenly I realized that I looked different, somehow more confident. No longer as someone who is afraid of disappointing someone, no longer as someone who constantly feels obligated. When I went downstairs, I suddenly realized that it wasn't just that I was smiling more. There was a lightness in me that hadn't been there before. 6 months ago, I was drowning, financially, emotionally, and spiritually. I was exhausted by the people who were supposed to love me. Now I'm building a life on my own terms. I get a chance at a better job. I'm saving up for my own place. I am surrounded by people who respect me. Do I miss my family sometimes? To be honest, yes. I wish I had a family that supported me, just like they supported Janet. A family that would be proud of my achievements. A family that would treat me with basic respect. But I don't miss the family I had. The one who saw in me nothing more than a resource that could be exploited. Maybe someday they will change. Maybe someday we'll have a relationship again. But I'm not going to wait for that day. I'm moving forward. My life is just beginning, and for the first time, she truly feels like mine.